Welcome to Lyric Lab Poetry. My name's Martin Jago, and this video is called Poetry Advice with a Pinch of Salt. We're going to look at some of the truisms, some of the firmly held beliefs about what writers should be doing. And number one on the list is one we will all have heard, and it is to write every day. We're going to re-examine and revisit this idea and see if it still holds true. So of course, writing every day is really, really good advice in many respects. It helps us to get over the fear of the blank page. It teaches the writer that a regular routine can lead to a kind of really decent body of work over time. It also helps us to understand that imagination is an action, not a mood. We shouldn't be sitting around waiting for the muse to descend. We should just kind of get on with it. So writing every day is actually really, really good and valuable advice. But are there times when this advice might be harmful? Or work against us? And I can certainly think of a few situations in which that might be the case. So let's look at those next. And top of the list as far as that is concerned is that we might make it a kind of rod for our own backs. We might become guilt-laden if we miss one of the days. And that's not a really productive thing to be kind of thinking or feeling. There are going to be gaps in your schedule where you don't write, and for good reason sometimes. It might be that we need time to submit work. We need time to edit work, and maybe even incubation time away from the work itself. So finally, I think we should consider, maybe as a way of balancing these two pros and cons, are there circumstances when the information becomes redundant and is no longer useful to us? Well, the answer to that is, of course, yes. If you are actually already writing every day, if it is or has become second nature, then you don't need to rely on this mantra anymore. And as I just said, it may be that there are good reasons that you're not writing because you are submitting, or there's an incubation period. Silence is sometimes very valuable to writers. Time away from the page is also very useful. And also I think, we've got to hold firm and true to the idea of the page as the sort of playground, not the factory. So, if you're sitting down because it's a chore, because it's an obligation, then stop doing that. And I remember from my own kind of experience, in childhood, decades and decades ago, I must have been maybe 8 or 9 years old. I don't know if I decided this or if it was decided for me, but I was going to write a diary, and then I stopped doing it. And then my parents were like, no, you're going to sit down. It's the time to write your diary entry for today. And then, of course, it stopped becoming the thing that it should always be, which is a sense of adventure or play. And then it became about sort of just regurgitating facts, quotidian facts from my daily sort of life as an 8-year-old, sort of the breakfast that I ate, the friends that I played with. And it stopped being useful to me at that point. So yes, it is very useful, but with these caveats. Okay, number 2 on the list is another piece of advice that is up there with number 1, and that is that you should be reading as widely as possible and as often as possible. You should be reading as much poetry as you can possibly read. And again, this is in many respects really, really good advice, because what it helps to do is to connect you with the wider poetry community. It introduces and strengthens your knowledge, of course, but it introduces you to new poets and sometimes new ways of working, new ways of imagining language on the page, and that is very, very useful for you to mine. And T.S. Eliot would say steal. I think he didn't mean plagiarize. I think he meant take and reinvent, reimagine. That's one of the most valuable things that you can have as a poet. So it really is about broadening horizons. The first question I was asked in the interview for my place on the Masters in Creative Writing at Oxford was the answer I stumbled over actually, which was, how does writing in other areas inform your work in your sort of primary area of focus? And I kind of made up my answer as I kind of stumbled through it. But I think I got there in the end, and that was that it can be very valuable for you as a poet to be reading novels, to be reading nonfiction, to be reading drama, because each one of those has lessons for the poet. So, for example, it may be in a piece of nonfiction, how does reading poetry inform your nonfiction writing? It may be that attention to detail, worrying and thinking about every point of punctuation, which is something that happens in poetry a lot, is something that you might be able to apply across other sort of genres and writings in other areas. So what are the cons as far as reading? I don't think there are many, but I suppose, especially for younger poets, it could just be a sense of being overwhelmed. I mean, there's so much material out there. Where do you begin? How do you start? What poets do you begin with? There is also maybe a danger of, in the early stages of developing your own voice, the mimicry of other voices. But I actually think that's a valuable part of the learning process. I think one of the biggest dangers is paralysis via comparison. I mean, for any of those English lit students decades ago who were reading Nabokov or Conrad and thinking, wow, this writer is excellent, and they're not even writing in their first language. In fact, they're not even writing in their second language. What hope is there for me? So I think that sometimes that does happen, but again, I think it's about trying to hold that sort of negative idea at arm's length and just trying to not compare yourself, because the thing that makes you who you are is uniquely yours and no one else's. When might this advice stop being useful? I think, as I said with writing every day, when that becomes habitual, not intentional, that is when it stops being useful. When it's something you're doing because it's second nature, not because you feel obliged to do it or because it feels like I must do this, it's what I'm supposed to do as a poet. When you're just doing it naturally, because you've built that habit up, then I think the information, the advice stops being useful to us. Number 3, and we're told this a lot, aren't we, to avoid cliche at all costs. You see what I've done there? Avoid cliche like the plague. Okay, so avoiding cliche is obviously good advice for poets. Can really help us to be a bit more precise and think in original ways about expressing the human condition. It can also help to develop an ear for overused language or imagery, and also pushes us towards kind of greater precision in writing. Is there a time when this advice might be harmful? Well, I suppose there could be the intentional use of cliche in a poem that we could use. So don't avoid all cliches all the time. There is maybe a situation in which you might use cliche in a constructive way, or you might take a cliche and reimagine it. Also, of course, cliches exist because they are successful. They get us there in a sort of short space of time. And I'm not saying use the cliche. I'm saying that finding the long way around might overcomplicate things sometimes in our writing. One other thought in this respect is that it might kind of create a fear in us of shared language. There is a kind of common language that we're all familiar with, and that sometimes is useful to the poet. When does the advice stop being useful? Well, I think when you understand how cliches are part of the culture, when you're able to take a cliche and reframe it and reimagine it, then this advice no longer applies to you. Although I think it's good to have it at the back of your mind always, because it is generally, and all of this advice I think is good, and we're just revisiting it, because when we first touched on these thoughts or ideas and thought, yeah, that happens to be, I believe in that idea, that may have been decades ago, and of course the person we are today is different. So for that reason, it's a useful exercise, I think, to revisit these topics and this advice. Very high on our list of advice is going to be show, don't tell. We've all heard this, and it's really, really good advice. I think it really helps the poet to avoid abstraction and to think about language in a vivid, kind of grounded way. It also teaches us to give attention to the sensory detail in our poems. How could it be harmful? Well, I think maybe it might make the poet afraid of direct emotional statement. Sometimes telling helps to bring clarity to the language, and also it's a different way of transmitting the truth of a poem. It's just that I think beginner poets are often doing that more often than they are showing. So I think there's a balance to be found. Maybe, I don't know, I'm not going to put a percentage on it, but 90% versus 10%, 90% show. No, I think there is a place for telling in poetry. It's just that, it's a habit that I think is all too prevalent, and that's why the advice is there: show, don't tell. When is this advice not useful? It might be that telling is a deliberate stylistic choice on the part of the poet in a particular poem. It might be that you're trying to examine things through assertion or argument, and telling is the right tool for that job. Last but not least is find your own voice. This is very prevalent, this advice, in the poetry community. What exactly does it mean, and how useful is it? Well, actually, it's really, really useful, I think, if we can use it to help us think about what it is that makes us on the page who we are. Maybe the rhythms, the stylistic kind of or thematic elements that we gravitate towards. It also helps to validate personal experience and the idea, the notion that what is uniquely yours is uniquely yours, not anyone else's. You may not often feel that when you're writing, but it is true that all writers have a kind of style choice. The way you frame things, whether you use rhythm, meter, or rhyme or not in your poetry. It might also help us to learn and break free from idiosyncrasies in our work that we want to avoid. I think where this advice can become a bit sort of dicey is when we think about a voice in poetry as singular and static. It may actually shift, and you may want to express yourself in completely different ways in order to capture a unique voice or speaker. It may be a persona poem, for example, that is nothing like your own in your regular writing or in your everyday writing. When might this advice stop being useful? I think when you understand that a voice is sometimes contextual, when you've built a body of work that establishes a kind of tone or voice that is uniquely yours or is recognized as such, and also when you want to deliberately adopt different kind of approaches to your work. So there you are, 5 really interesting and useful bits of advice that we've put under the microscope and re-examined and reframed. I hope you've found the exercise useful. And of course, as always, I would just want to say thank you for watching the videos. It means a great deal to me and the channel. Please do give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't yet done so. And I'll be back soon with more poetry content. Thanks very much for watching.